You are listening to the Enormocast.
So what do you approach in your approach shoes? El Cap, the Diamond, the Traps? How about Super Crack Buttress or the Mushroom Boulder in Waco? And what about your mailbox, your job, the local coffee shop? Have you ever approached something scary, awe-inspiring, or heartbreaking in your approach shoes? And what is your actual approach like? Do you stomp, dance, or electric slide your approaches? Or do you walk in beauty like the night of cloudless climbs and starry skies? Climbers do everything from wide cracks to wedding vows in their approach shoes. Not to mention hike, scramble, and lead those last few pitches in the dark. So why not get an approach shoe that can handle it all and look great doing it, like the TX4 from Sportiva? The mighty TX4 approach shoe sports a sticky sole, leather upper, bomber rand, and unbeatable build, as we'd expect from Sportiva. So whether you're bombing up some trail to paradise in the pre-dawn light or just kicking around town feeling the afterglow, why not approach everything with style in the TX4 from Sportiva? Check out the whole TX line at sportiva.com or your favorite local shop.
We gotta get
Listen, where you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
big
big
house. We
place
sold it
outside
out.
of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold it out.
20,000 seats. We really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Good weather, bad weather. Now or later, anytime for climbing.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Check. Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It's about 10:30 on October 14th, 2019, and this is episode 185 of the Enormocast, a conversation with Hobo Greg. Who is Hobo Greg? Well, he is a man who climbs in Joshua Tree. And frankly, I don't know too much more about him. Even after doing this interview, I don't actually know his name, I realized when I was starting to get this thing together. Now, I'm sure I could ferret it out somewhere, but I started to, and then I stopped. He introduced himself to me as Hobo Greg. All of our correspondence has been under the moniker Hobo Greg, and let's just leave it at that. The man, the myth, the legend of Hobo Greg. Are you intrigued yet? You should be. I wasn't at first, but once I was put under Hobo Greg's spell, then I got a lot more interested. And we talk in the interview about how this interview came about, so I'll leave it at that. But I get quite a few requests to talk to the every person. Of course, a lot of people use every man, but we're beyond that nowadays. Every person, the kind of average bloke or lass out there climbing, and I kind of don't see much of an angle in it, actually. And what I mean by an angle is just, what's the story there? I need a little bit of a story. A couple of years ago, I talked to Buddy Nielsen of the band Senses Fail, and Buddy was definitely an everyman type climber. That's what he said. He also climbed in Joshua Tree, which is coincidental because that's Hobo Greg's main stomping grounds, and loved sort of easy trad climbing, as does Hobo Greg. But he had an angle. He's a lead singer of a rock band, a touring rock band with albums and hits and all that sort of thing. So there was an angle there, and I don't know what the angle is with Hobo Greg. He just kind of showed up, and we got this one done. And actually, it turned out to be really fascinating and interesting. And if anything, we kind of got into what, if any, blueprint there is for doing what he did. And what he did was kind of walk away from a former life pretty late in life, around 28, and kind of upend everything and move out to the coast and become a climber out of the blue. And speaking of emails and things that I get, I hear a lot about that. People kind of wondering, well, how it's done. I live in this place. There is no climbing. I want to be a climber. What do I do? And I don't always have much of an answer for them because it's too late in my life to really understand what it takes these days to do something like that. I had an easy path to it, going off to college and learning how to climb, and this big pivotal moment in your life where you have a lot of choices to make, but it's easier to make them at those times. And so, yeah, I don't always have an answer. I don't know if we have any answers in here, but here's a guy who did it. He definitely walked away from a different life and turned it into a climbing life. And that's the meat of the Hobo Greg story. And frankly, I admire people who do that. It was Joseph Campbell who said, "We must let go of the life we have planned so we can accept the one that is waiting for us." But it takes courage to do that. It takes bravery to cross the threshold to adventure. Do you know Joseph Campbell? The hero with 1,000 faces? We should do a whole show on that sometime. I got a lot of opinions about how climbing fits into Joseph Campbell's hero journey. You liberal arts people, come on. And if you want to find out more about Hobo Greg, he does have a website, hobogreg.com. Do mythical creatures have websites? Apparently they do. Okay, why don't we let Hobo Greg weave his spell upon us? And we'll talk about Joseph Campbell another time. When you think about it, is there another gear company so dedicated to outfitting climbers from head to toe as Black Diamond? They've got lightweight modern helmets and headlamps for your pointy head, high-performance apparel to wrap that sweet climber bod you've been cultivating, all the way down to their line of advanced climbing shoes for those tender piggies. They've got crash pads for the pad sniffers, the best protection money can buy for the trad dads, ice tools for the masochists. Pitons, haul bags, portal ledges, backpacks, draws, beaners, harnesses, tents, probes, skis, poles, and even the signature Enormocast rhinestone-studded unisex microfleece G-string. Well, no, that doesn't exist yet, despite me stuffing the suggestion box every chance I get. So next time you're shopping for, well, nearly anything a climber could want, honor the generations of weary Black Diamond engineers poring over AutoCAD in their cubicles when they'd much rather be climbing. And go to blackdiamondequipment.com or your favorite local shop to see the fruits of their dedicated labor. And remember, Black Diamond is a proud sponsor of the Enormocast. Just to preface this thing, what was it, like a year ago maybe?
Yeah, about that.
I suddenly started getting an onslaught of requests for somebody named Hobo Greg. And, I get a lot of requests. And I appreciate them, and I don't want to shut anybody down because, again, and I've said this elsewhere, like, the off-piste, random interview has often like been a real nice surprise and a bonus, and so the sponsored athlete, sometimes great, sometimes you yawn. Oh, you climb really well because you climb all the time. Tell me more. But. Yeah, so I'm totally open to suggestions, but it was funny because there was, after a few, I was like, okay, somebody's trolling me right now. Like all these supposedly, seemingly like random and uncoordinated people suddenly hitting me up.
I may have walked around Hidden Valley Campground and asked fellow dirtbags for a little helping hand to get on here.
So those were just random people that were like, okay, I'll do it. Or
those
were they
mostly
pros?
My friends,
okay,
but some
good.
of them were just random folks in the space station of, drinking a beer. Hey, have you heard of the Enormocast?
Right.
Well, you want to do me a favor and send an email?
Right. So anyway, here you are. A year later, you managed to get to Colorado, which actually is another thing I'm often saying, but I'm not making it up, is that it's sometimes hard to get guys and girls who are based in California and on the show because they never leave.
Why would we leave California?
I know.
I mean, it doesn't make sense. There's the best granite and best weather in the country.
Right.
And now I'm here.
Right.
But it's okay. Colorado's pretty cool.
Right on. Well, thank you. I know they just, Honnold just had something from the trade show where he just like spent 15 minutes slamming Colorado climbing. So
It was pretty entertaining, I thought.
It's
and
fine.
Mostly accurate.
At this point, we're happy to like have everybody have the impression that this place sucks.
That's true. Yeah. Tell them to
Go to
somewhere
California.
else. Yeah.
Everybody go to California. You guys can have.
Keep going west.
Keep going west. There's no lines in Yosemite. It's completely empty of climbers. Keep on keeping on. So, no, I get it. Like I've climbed in California. I lived in Southern California. Yeah, it's amazing, but it's like the Colorado scene is also has it just pure quality and proliferation of climbing, maybe less, because we're up against Yosemite, but I think we have much more variety. And if we were to
certainly more limestone.
Right. And I've been, for years, I've been trying to get some sort of either military coup or just like a nonviolent takeover of, the southeast corner of Utah and bring it into Colorado.
I would support that.
Or maybe just cut a line straight down the front of the Wasatch, all the way down, and we'd basically
we get the eastern side.
Yeah, and I think most of those people would be happier as Coloradoans, but maybe not. Leave Salt Lake. Leave. You guys can have St. George.
They can have Maple and
all that stuff.
We just want the Red Rock country.
Well, there's also a great bumper sticker, the Free Tibet bumper sticker.
Yeah.
Well, there's a great one. I think a guy here in the Valley made it, but it says Free Moab, and it's a Colorado plate is the background. Anyhow, so there you go, Moab climbers. Just a little diss from Colorado for you. Anyhow, so back to you coming on the show. Why is it that you woke up one morning where it's like, I need to do the Enormocast?
Well, like most younger climbers, I think getting into this program has helped me on those long road trips in between the climbing destinations. And I think like a lot of other people at first, I'm like, man, this guy talks about himself more than I talk about myself. But it grew on me pretty quick. And it got to the point where I really looked forward bi-monthly to these episodes coming out and giving me a glimpse into the world of some pro climbers, some who are maybe not pro, but definitely have been around the scene for a long time. And just thought to myself, man, wouldn't it be hilarious? Wouldn't I catch so much flack from my friends if I got on the Enormocast? I'm like, I'm like a minor internet, maybe not internet celebrity, but a minor celebrity in the climbing world. Like I said, I'll show up pretty much any crag I go to, and there's someone there who's, I've heard about you.
Right.
And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but yeah, it just kind of dawned on me one day that if I, quote, crowdsource my way onto the Enormocast, then I think we could pull this off.
All right. Well, let me talk to you about my perspective, because a lot of times I get suggestions and they're good, but either they fall by the wayside or, I just don't get around to it. The face-to-face thing's always tricky. People are giving me suggestions and I'm like, yeah, when I get there, I'll look them up. Yeah. Or, I say, let them to let me know if you're coming my way or whatever. But what did interest me about sort of the legend of Hobo Greg, which it's sort of out there a little bit, but I wanted to talk to someone who, is like centering their life around climbing and around being on the road, because we're in this like crazy period of van life, and there's kind of like both this reverence for the dirtbag, but also this constant dissing of it.
Yeah.
It's
Does it even exist?
Does it even exist? Or, they're just like privileged kids who, who are pretending for a little while and all that sort of thing. So here you are to talk about it. So tell me about, your life, what it looks like in terms of climbing, in terms of, just in terms of what it is you do to, again, like become this bit of this legend. Again, California kind of West Coast based a little bit more than here in Colorado, but you're definitely out there, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I've also climbed in the Northeast as well, where I grew up. I was born in New York City and lived there till I was 12, New Jersey till I was 25. No outdoor influence in my life besides Boy Scouts. I didn't even know that rock climbing was a thing until in my 20s probably. Got into scrambling a little bit in the mountains, doing some third and fourth class stuff. And then got into a little more alternative outdoor lifestyle, doing trail work in Montana and in New York. And through that, got into hitchhiking. And that felt like a really cool, adventurous way to explore, kind of following that like Alexander Supertramp, Into the Wild mold. I even visited some of the places like Slab City that he went to. And I thought I would find my community in that world, but I really just found a bunch of like train hopping kids who are doing a lot of drugs and not really going anywhere with their lives. But it was through hitchhiking that I found climbing. I hitchhiked into Joshua Tree in February 2015 and walked up to these dudes in a parking lot. They were smoking some weed. And I'm like, hey, you guys look like friends I haven't met yet. And they took me climbing. It was like that easy. And I just will never forget that feeling of, it's just a single pitch climb that we did, nothing crazy. I did it in hiking shoes, but the feeling of getting to the top and all the colors were brighter. The smells were more vibrant. Like everything just felt different from that moment on. And that's, over 4 years ago. And I've just immersed myself in that. And climbing came into my life at a very peculiar time. That did this hitchhiking trip, started, following and then even leading within about a month because the old guys, they were like, we're tired of putting up the route for you. Here's the rack. Go do it. And then I hitchhiked back to New Jersey at the end of that trip. And then about a month later, my dad died. And I was pretty unexpected. He was just walking across the road and got blasted by a truck.
Holy cow.
And me and him were really close.
That's terrible.
He would definitely be cool with going out that way rather than cancer or something else. But as soon as he died, the thought in my head was, I'm going back to Joshua Tree. Like, that's where I'm going to recover and heal. And so once we took care of everything, that's where I went. And I have left Joshua Tree since then, but not for very long, apparently. I've spent probably 2 years total out of the last 4.5 in Joshua Tree.
Okay.
Climbing came into my life like a really important time, I would say.
Right.
Like as soon as he died, I really just threw myself into it and went through the motions of like following, leading, soloing, decking, which we can talk about. I'm sure all my friends are going to be laughing about that one.
You might be. Are you another Red Point soloist?
It's funny. The joke is out there that if I go for it, I'll be the world's second Red Point free soloist.
You haven't
James
reset.
Lucas.
Okay, well,
it's funny too because it happened across the road. Like he fell north overhang on Intersection Rock, and I fell from the Space Station Direct, which is like line of sight. You can see those two things. So,
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. What's the Space Station Direct? It's just a way
not
to
in the
go,
book.
Go straight up there.
Directly up. The Italians would say directissima.
Right.
And just overconfident that day, I guess, and kind of just hucked it off and fell about 20 feet and dislocated my elbow.
Ooh, that's it.
Luckily, that was it. Yeah.
I mean, I've almost done that in the climbing gym. So
right. I know people who have taken way smaller falls and gotten way more jacked up. So I got super lucky. And also, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me as a climber, though, because it really showed me that
back it up a little
consequences
bit.
Real.
Right.
And I think because I was in that state, like this happened less than a year after my dad died. So I was in that state of, just going for it, not caring about a consequence of anything. And wound up hitting the ground.
Right. Well, let me back up. We've
been waiting to do that for a long time.
Yeah, we don't do it as much as we used to. The drinking actually has been, the heavy drinking on the podcast has actually been taken over a little bit more by the run out. But we have a tendency on there to be whiskey people, which goes faster into the crapper as far as the conversation goes. But anyway,
figured I'd keep it mellow with
there's a lot more, at whatever time of the morning it is right now. But we get a lot more clinking of the ice over there. But let me back up a little bit because I was just having a conversation literally this morning with my girlfriend Steph, and kind of talking about the archetype of how people get into climbing. More so in the past, I've had so many guests on here who were, this some little thing came into their life and they found a book, and it was just. And I kept saying that they were weird kids. They like needed this thing, and they also had sort of the courage in a lot of ways, because if you're a kid, a middle schooler, high schooler, like to go on a different path from all your peers is tricky. It's like volumes have been written about it. And then now we have the climbing gym, but part of me tends to disregard that a little bit because until the person is on their own and makes their own choice. And so much of the climbing gym for kids is just like any other sport. Like, mom and dad get me up and make me go. The coach makes me go, and so when you're on your own and you're in college, or are you going to, is climbing enough to still be something that you want to do? Or was it actually fulfilling a need that you no longer have, so to speak? Anyway, So I want to go back a little bit with all that preface and talk about who you were, that you ended up coming out of this suburban, or not suburban, city life and suburban life, it sounds like maybe, to want to like suddenly leave town and hitchhike somewhere. And we're talking about, this is just a few years ago.
Yeah, it's like 4.5 years ago.
So we're talking about a time where I think very few people look at hitchhiking as a way to get around the way they did like 40 years ago in most of the country.
I didn't see too many other people out there.
There's still a few bastions, I think, rural parts or where, hitchhiking is something that you do. But even, I did it in New Zealand 30 years ago, and I don't know if, or 25 years ago, and I don't know if they do it there even anymore.
It's still pretty common there.
Right.
It's not common here.
Yeah. So here's this person. Where were you that aside? I mean, because you did that before your father died.
Yeah.
What was the impetus to become? I mean, this person that like. It reminds me a little bit of the Angela Van Wiemersch's story.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because I remember listening to that episode and being like, whoa, best friends.
Yeah, you could have met her out there.
Yeah. Sure. Oh. I mean, I just remember being a kid and seeing trains go by, and like, I'm like 6, and I was like, oh, I could jump on a train. And so as I got...
shit, my kid loves trains, and he's 3. Like, that's all he talks about.
Be on the lookout.
Yeah.
And I think as I got older, like after, skateboarded was like my first love in middle school and high school. And then after high school, didn't really fit in the college mold, odd jobs, whatever I can do to kind of get by, as well as pursuing photography, which is still huge in my life. I just wanted more adventure. Like I would read a book like Into the Wild and want to go live that sort of adventure. And so I finally did. Like when I started doing trail crew, I started hitchhiking just a little bit here and there. And then doing like bigger trips from Sacramento to Billings, Montana was like my first long hitchhiking trip, and kind of taught me a lot of how to navigate that world. And then I thought, man, it'd be cool to do like a really, really big trip. And so from Texas to Joshua Tree and then back was like 3,000 miles of hitching. Just always something in me that just has that wanderlust. I'm sure that a lot of people listening right now have that same feeling of, you spend too much time in one place and you just start going crazy. You want to check something else out, always looking for that novelty.
Right. Yeah, but not everybody does it. So it takes like some moment of again, courage is a little bit of the wrong word, because that implies some sort of heroism, but there's a bravery to it, to just walk away from the easy, the set, the job you had, or the social circle you had, or whatever. I mean, that's kind of really that's the thing, like that most of us at certain times in our lives, we wish we could, but we decide not to.
Right.
And maybe it's for the better. Who knows? It's not always the best idea. If you'd have gone out there and gotten knifed, we'd all be talking about what a fucking idiot you were, or whatever, totally. Or something. But it happened to work out for you.
Yeah.
Didn't John Waters just do some big hitchhiking thing? Like
he wrote a cool book about it. Right. He went like I think he went from San Francisco east, or it might have been the other way around. But
right.
I can't even imagine picking up John Waters. That'd be hilarious.
It'd be the best, actually. So let's, delve in just a little bit to this adventure. I know this is a climbing podcast, but here you are like doing a 3,000 mile hitchhike. Like, tell me a story. Like,
the impetus to do that was when I did trail crew, was with AmeriCorps. Since I didn't go to college, I didn't have any student loans or anything to use the AmeriCorps scholarship on. So I took a Leave No Trace Master Educator course with Knowles, and it happened to be in Saguaro National Park in Arizona. And I was like, well, I could just like take a bus or fly, but that doesn't sound as fun. So I took a bus down to Texas, because this was in January. I didn't want to hitch from New Jersey to start off in the winter. So I took a bus to Texas and then thumbed it from there to Saguaro. Took the course.
Taking a bus that far is its own adventure.
Yeah. I mean, if you've ever taken Greyhound, it's like, in my opinion, Greyhound doesn't care if you live or die.
Right.
I've seen some really great, like a dude with slices all over his neck, like oozing pus and stuff. He got kicked off the bus, and then somehow through like the Greyhound time warp, he was on the bus 3 states later again. No idea how he caught up. There's all kinds of goofy stuff. If you've ever taken Greyhound cross country,
Well, my friends, my European buddy, Joseba, who's a Spanish climber, dirtbag of all dirtbags, he always takes it here too. But he's like used to a European version of taking the bus. So every time he does it, he's just like, whoa, like this is pretty. But he likes it in that way of, seeing like true, bottom of the barrel America.
Yeah, for
through
sure.
a bus. Anyway, back to your story.
Yeah. So leaving Saguaro, got a ride to Joshua Tree and hitchhiked in. And like I said, just met these guys, and they just, the thing I learned about the climbing community right away was how welcoming and open it is. If you have a good attitude and a smile and maybe a beer or something, you're in. Right. Because I owe all of where I am now, like even my job as a guide, I owe all of that to the people who started me on that path, that maybe saw a little spark in me. They wanted to, got a free harness from this guy, got a pair of shoes for $8 from that guy, and just kind of pieced it together as I went.
Right. And then you were in Joshua Tree for a bit and then went all the way back home.
Yeah, I hitchhiked. I didn't know where that hitchhiking trip was going to go. It was very open-ended. But once I started climbing, it just felt like this is everything I've been waiting for in my life. Because I'd been backpacking. I'd been, like I said, doing some like third and fourth class stuff. And, my genesis story in climbing is probably a little more old school for someone who's 32
right.
to have gotten into it with trad on day one,
right.
like not even top roping, like, pulling gear out and learning how to do a rope backpack at the top. And,
right.
So it's pretty, I think I did my first sport climbing like this year, basically.
Okay.
At Smith.
So
4 years in and I finally start sport climbing.
Yeah. So what kind of people, pick up a hitchhiker these days?
It's funny. People always think like getting into a car with a stranger is really dangerous. That always felt like the most relaxed portion of hitchhiking. It was like, okay, I can kind of let my guard down a little bit and just like recover. Because being out on the road and meeting those, like nobody really hitchhikes for fun in this country, it seems like. So it's like the people you meet hitchhiking are doing it because they don't really have any other options. And it's kind of spooky at times. And then just, where do you sleep at night? Like
right.
I've done things from like, those little prefab sheds that you'll see in front of a Home Depot. I saw one of those at a truck stop once and was like, hey, that looks better than sleeping in a ditch tonight. So I just let myself in, slept on the back lawn of Lyndon Johnson's Texas White House in Johnsonville, Texas. That was a fun one. I think it's cool to have to be creative. But yeah, like you said, who picks me up? It's everyone, mostly poor people, mostly like lower and middle class, but all different ethnicities, all different walks of life. I've gotten rides from off-duty cops, school teachers, farmers. Never really got like any finance investment type folks stopping.
Right. The Tesla never slowed down.
Tesla, general rule of thumb, the more beater the car, the more likely they are to stop.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like a commiseration thing of like,
could be.
This guy, I've been here. This guy needs some help or whatever.
Yeah.
Did you get any truckers?
I had one truck in like Seminole, Texas pull over, and he was going like 70. So by the time he stopped, I had to run like quarter mile to catch up with them. And we only got like 20 miles down the road before his truck broke down.
Oh, man.
I slept outside of a church that night because those are usually pretty safe.
Right.
But yeah, truckers are not.
I think there's a lot of. I think nowadays there's a lot of policy against it. So
Yeah,
it has
for
to be an
sure.
independent guy.
Yeah.
And then it's like time is money. It's a cutthroat business where time is money. So like dealing with some person on the side of the road is probably pretty tricky in terms of like cutting into your bottom line too. So
for sure, it was mostly great times. Like I never had a negative experience with another person. I think there was a moment where towards the end of that trip, I'd already paid for my bus ticket back to New Jersey, had a job waiting for me. I was pretty broke, had like $6 left, I think. And I'm in Big Bend National Park. And they basically just kicked me out for hitchhiking. And I've hitchhiked in all kinds of national parks. Rangers will just like smile and wave. But for whatever reason, maybe because it's the border, they looked at me like I was insane and a criminal. And the way they talked to me was just like, I've never really been hassled by cops much hitchhiking. So this was just, it was a really hard experience, getting kicked out, having no money, no cell phone, no one to call, even if I had a cell phone. I remember like breaking down and crying on the side of the road, just feeling like so incredibly lonely, like 2,500 miles from home. But I think it's those kind of type 2 moments, just like in climbing, that in the moment it sucks, but for the rest of your life, you're like, wow, that was an incredible experience.
So you weren't even running a cell phone
at the time? No.
Yeah. Okay.
No, it was like old school paper maps.
Right.
I had not an iPhone, what do you call it? An iPod, I guess. So I took some pictures with that.
Right.
But it wasn't a phone. Like I couldn't look things up.
What were those things called? The pre-phone things. Right? Yeah. Well, it was like they lasted. They were like in between just the straight up music iPod and the phone because it had apps on it and stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So you had but you had no like communication.
No,
in terms
it was
of
just
that.
totally figuring it out as I went, you know, and like I said, being creative, especially about where you sleep. That's kind of the biggest crux of it is,
Right.
you know, I'm not going to pay for a hotel every night and I don't want to sleep in a homeless shelter. So just got to be creative out there.
Right. So when you left town on this sort of thing, your dad's still alive. I assume you had a peer group in New Jersey.
I mean, maybe
were you-
there was like one or two people that
Right.
I got along with there. And that's the thing is like when you live in a place like New Jersey and you're into the outdoors,
Right.
there's just not a lot for you there. I think,
Right.
you know, anyone who's listening, if you live in New Jersey, get out. It gets better. If you just keep going west, keep going.
Right.
Or just go somewhere that there's a little bit more of open-mindedness. Like, you know, I grew up in New York City, which is the biggest city in this country, but I feel like I grew up in a place that was as closed-minded as any small town in terms of like, I grew up in an Italian community. Like the Italians lived on this block and the Puerto Ricans on this block and the Irish over here. And like everyone just stayed in their own little world and everyone was kind of like, just pretty close-minded overall. It's kind of surprising that you can find that even within the depths of a big city.
Yeah. Talk about a little bit about the evolution from there. You go back to Joshua Tree after your dad is killed.
Yeah.
And what is there other family still in New Jersey in terms of?
Not in New Jersey, but they like my mom and my sister and my
Okay.
nephew still live in New York.
Okay.
And have to make that pilgrimage once a year to see him.
Okay.
But yeah, there's, you know,
See, yeah.
there's not a lot for me there. It's
Right.
like people ask me, don't you miss it? I'm like, no, I hope New York sinks to the bottom of the ocean like the turd that it is. I miss bagels and pizza. That's it. You know? Yeah, like as far as a peer group, like there's only a few people
Right.
back there that I identify with. And, you know, I found my peer group in climbing. Like I think that was a big part of climbing for me was that it's not just this isolated activity. Like skateboarding for me was just always by myself for whatever the reason. That's just how it was. Climbing by nature of, you know, needing a partner. I think it's really beautiful that you find this community of people that they're not identical to you, but they're, you know, most of the people you meet are going to be very like-minded to you. And it's really cool having, like I said, having grown up in a place where I didn't know anything about that. I really didn't even know what climbing was until my 20s. Probably saw Honnold on 60 Minutes, and that was like, oh, rock climbing, okay. So finding that community of people in Joshua Tree, especially when I found it, was really important to me. Especially, like I said, coming there after my dad had died, going, not just immersing myself in the act of climbing, but immersing myself in that community and doing like the Dutch oven dinners every night with everyone and like night solos with the friends and, you know, everyone going through the Chasm of Doom and naked running around the campground and all those kind of shenanigans that I'm sure you've been a part of in your time as well.
Right. I did spend a bit of time in Joshua Tree a long time ago at this point, though. So you got back to Joshua Tree. You know, what was next? Did you have an idea of what was going to happen out there?
No.
Or were you just like, I'm on the wind.
Yeah.
I need to be in this place. But what was the next step then?
Yeah, I mean, like you just said, it was just floating on the wind. I definitely didn't think that I would, you know, get to the point of doing what I'm doing now, where like I climb, not mountaineering, but I climb technical rock in the mountains, which is like my favorite thing, going on like a backpacking trip and then climbing or just doing like a big day in the mountains. That was way out of the horizon at the time. I just knew that, like when I got back to Joshua Tree that second season, I'd probably led 4 pitches in my life. Couple in the Gunks, a couple in Joshua Tree the season before. So my main focus was to continue learning how to lead, mostly through finding other rookies and going out and getting into trouble. The mentorship, I think a lot of people have spoken about this, that mentorship seems to maybe have kind of gone out the window nowadays. Maybe it's just because there's so many people getting into climbing.
That's my theory.
Yeah.
Is like the sort of mentorship regime is overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You know, it was kind of like mostly replacement, you know, sort of like population in a way.
Yeah.
Like mentors, you know, there was one for every 2 or 3 climbers coming into the.
Now it's like 1 for every 10.
Yeah, it feels like it's just too much, you know.
Yeah. And there was people that helped me out along the way, more
Right.
just like, here's a little piece of info, here's a little piece of info. But I didn't find that like 1 or 2 or 3 people that would take me out and really show me what was up. So luckily I learned without making too tragic of mistakes, never dropped anyone, never been dropped, anything like that. But definitely placed some gear that would not have held.
Right.
Definitely ran it out when I maybe should have backed off, things like that. But I think that's part of the learning process, and it's cool to think I'm not a hard man like Walter Bonatti or someone like that. But when I read about Walter and, oh yeah, we just took the rope out of our parents' garage and went climbing.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a little more my story than like, oh yeah, I went to a gym and then I was on the comp team and then this and then that. So.
Well, I mean, you mentioned how like your intro to it was old school.
Yeah.
And I think we've gone through this too on the show because, yeah, there's been a change and it's mostly the gyms. Mm-hmm. And I think the big change though from the gyms is that you arrive at the rock. If you've learned to climb in a gym and then all of a sudden you're going to go outside with a certain amount of physical ability that's beyond, like a little ways beyond where it should be in terms of what you ought to be trying outside, where the consequences are much higher. And those two things in your case and in the pre-gym era kind of went hand in hand. You couldn't climb any harder than 5'7", even if you were pretty athletic. For your first route.
Yeah.
And so if you did for some reason start leading immediately, the likelihood of you actually falling off were pretty low.
Right.
But now it's like, yeah, you can arrive there having, done the 512 in the gym and then just be like, well, I'll dial it back a little bit and try this 511. And it's like, no. Things, are about to go haywire.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of placing gear that wouldn't have held, that was fine because you didn't fall on it.
Right.
Yeah. And I always say that. It's like, I have no idea, the first 2 years of leading, on a multi-pitch climb, I never took a whipper.
Yeah.
So as long as my anchor's held, which is why you're doing the 3 points, redundancy, all that sort of stuff. Because who knows, one or two of them maybe suck. But as long as that's going on, you never know whether your gear is any good.
I've gone whole climbing seasons where I'm climbing like 4 or 5 days a week for, 6 to 8 weeks. Without taking a fall. And a lot of that comes from just having a conservative mindset with this stuff. For me, like pushing the grade is not necessarily what I'm there to do. Every once in a while, I get it in me to like, yeah, I'm going to try something a little harder. Mm-hmm. For the most part, though, climbing for me is just more of like this personal expression / personal exploration.
Right.
Like being able to do this thing that is objectively dangerous, especially like I try to explain to my mom that just because you have a rope doesn't necessarily mean it's safe. Like, with trad climbing, there's just plenty of normal routes that have like extreme do not fall zones.
Yeah.
I've always just approached it as like this inner journey. And so, pushing the grade, the difficulty is not necessarily what I'm looking for. It's more like, that personal process. And I hate falling. Like I was at Smith a couple months ago and I made myself take practice falls, like just hucking myself off the route, and none of them felt good. Like even after fall number 20, you'd think I'd be like, okay, this is okay. I was like, no, I hate this.
Yeah, I do too, actually. And back to the old school thing. Like I always say, like I have times when I have no problem with falling, but if I don't fall for a long time, the old mindset creeps back in, and I get gripped above bolts on steep climbing. Not like terrified, not like petrified, but it's there.
Yeah.
And these folks that are taking, just lobbing off a steep sport climbs, totally safe. My intellectual mind knows that like it's the perfect place to fall. Overhanging 513, take a 30-footer, awesome, more rope out, softer fall, like all the mechanics work. I'm still going to be terrified.
Yeah, emotional and intellect are two very different things.
And so, but also, I mean, thinking about if you're mostly trad climbing, falling on gear is a bigger deal. And secondly, if you're climbing a Joshua tree, like just winging off of a lot of those routes, regardless of whether you're going to hit the ground, can be, they're slabby.
Yeah, you're going to hit something.
Features. I mean, it's not falling in the gym. It's not falling. Yeah. On a steep, sweeping, overhanging sport climb. So I get it. And I didn't fall for years.
Right.
For years. Yeah. Although I never took either. It was not in my lexicon to take either, which is really funny because I have this like, I don't know what, I guess I just didn't push myself too hard or I just hung on by the skin of my teeth kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Because it was illegal to say take.
Right.
When I mean, and it's not even that it was that era because we were past that era, but I always joke that we all me and my buddies like for the first few years of my climbing, climbed like it was like 1976.
Totally.
Even though it was,
must not fall.
Yeah, even though it was the 90s.
Yeah.
You know, and all this sort of stuff. So
I think that's cool though. I mean, on the show you talk a lot about like the golden age of climbing or like the 60s, 70s Yosemite kind of thing. And, you know, some people might look at that and think it's a tripe or it's old or whatever, but I think it's great. Like I'm a huge fan of history in general, especially in climbing.
Right.
And I think, you know, thinking back to what they've done, like I've done a few all passive leads and I'm like, oh my God, this is what it used to be like without cams. This is insane. And it's cool to have that respect for what they used to do. And I think for me, it's, you know, climbing is a personal journey. So my ethics are my own alone. I hold myself to a standard that I would hope people like Royal Robbins would look highly upon. I never ask anyone else to do it my way. I think that's a little annoying, but you know, for myself, I like to climb clean. I'd rather on-site 5.7 than project 5.10.
right.
You know, or whatever the numbers might be.
Whatever the numbers might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I used to joke. I only started leading 10 on gear outside of Indian Creek because we all know that's not really trad climbing. You started leading 10 on gear maybe about a year and a half ago. I used to joke, yeah, I flashed 5.9 on my first day. Haven't climbed harder since.
Right. That's a pretty good philosophy too. How long have you been climbing at this point?
It's been about 4.5 years.
Okay, it's been about 4.5 years. You're guiding now.
Yeah. Yeah, I did my first guide season 2018-19.
Okay. Did they run you through the AMGA?
Yeah. So using that AmeriCorps Education Award money, which I have nothing else to use it on, I got my SPI.
And where did that come from?
It's when I did trail work.
Oh, okay.
So got this scholarship money from having busted my butt doing manual labor in the woods with a bunch of other sweaty hippies. And yeah, didn't have anything conventional to use it on because I didn't go to college, nor do I want to. So using it on an SPI, didn't really know if I wanted to get into guiding. I just, you know, figured it'd be cool. I'd learn some tricks, which I definitely did. But it turns out I have the personality for guiding. And, you know, it's something that I've really fallen in love with. Like facilitating an experience for someone else. It gives me a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment, you know, and I think it's cool. Like I've heard you speak about your guiding on the show, and it sounds like it's something you were really enjoyed as well when you were doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've only done it for a season, so I can't say that it's like, yeah, I'm going to do this forever.
Well, I mean, you know, almost nothing lasts forever, but yeah, I mean, it takes a certain mindset. And actually, I'll ask you that. You're only in your first year. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I think a lot of people see guiding as this outlet to, you know, continue a life in climbing. And what you said, like, made my ears perk up of like, oh, I found out I had sort of the demeanor or the personality for guiding, which is really, 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 really the important part.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks it has, before they get into it, or frankly, before they meet a lot of guides, they think it has like technical ability is like a big part of it. But if you're, you know, you got to have the mindset. So can you tell me a little bit about what you believe that to be?
Yeah.
In terms of how it reflects in how you approach guiding?
Yeah. I think mostly it's my energy and enthusiasm for wanting to give people the best experience possible. Like I want them to think at the end of the day, man, I really could not have had this day of climbing without hiring a guide, or maybe even specifically this guide. Because for me, it is more than just the technical skills. Like you could teach just about anyone how to build a top rope, but how do you get people to engage people when they're a little scared or they're unsure of their own abilities, or adding more flavor to the day of talking about the geology and the flora and the fauna and the history of the place, and kind of coming up with a plan for the day, always being able to adjust it as you go, of course, but like thinking of like, okay, what do these people want out of the day? What can I give them? What can I show them that they wouldn't have found on their own? And they wouldn't have just been able to Google, you know, like what cool things to do in Joshua Tree. You know, let's try to give them a little bit more of an insider's view of things.
Right. Who are you working for?
I work for Stone Adventures mostly. Okay. I freelanced for just about everyone in Joshua Tree my first season until Stone Adventures kind of bumped me up, and that's my main gig now.
How many companies are there? Did they limit the concessions?
No, it's not like Yosemite where it's just the YMS. No, it's basically if you have insurance and a cert.
Right.
So you have an SPI and an insurance policy, you get a permit. And I think there's like probably at least 10 guide services that operate in the town of Joshua Tree.
Oh, wow.
And then probably another 15 or so that hold permits in San Diego and LA and elsewhere.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty. I think it's a really interesting place to guide because, you know, it's one of the more popular national parks, 3 million visitors a year now. Parking is pretty limited, crowded on the weekends, of course. The climbing is the worst climbing to take people on if they've never rock climbed before because there's no jugs, there's no holds. It's all, like you said, it's all slabs and cracks. And you have to navigate working around all these other guides too. Wow. So I think and setting up a top rope there is really challenging. There's very few bolted anchors. Right. You know, there's no veg to use, no vegetation. So everything's set back all the way. You got to use like your 100-foot static on some of these things. So yeah, I think I enjoy rising to that challenge of having to use a lot of these tricks that maybe in other places you wouldn't have to do.
Yeah, I mean, I guided there.
Oh,
Did
cool.
you know that?
No, I didn't. Who'd you work for?
I worked for A16. Does those stores even exist in LA?
I've never heard of A16.
Really?
I don't go to LA, so maybe I don't know.
Well, they were, it was stores. They were like I mean, they were kind of like a mini REI sort of store.
Okay.
I don't know if they're a co-op or not, but they felt like it. And yeah, I just like worked out of there, you know, people and recruiting people in LA is where I was. I think they had San Diego stuff. And then, yeah, just, I mean, exactly what you're talking about. Like classes, which I always enjoyed the classes more than the pure guiding.
Yeah. Education is really fun.
So we do anchor classes, there and in Talkeet Suicide in the summertime. And then I did a few days for Bob Gaines.
Yeah, he's still there.
Yeah. Vertical Ventures.
Yeah. He's still working.
Yeah. So, but then at that point, I want to say that there was maybe one other company that was guiding out there. And it was, I mean, super tiny.
Yeah.
There was probably 6 or 7 people like mainly guiding. And then each, like Bob would pick up somebody in the busy season or whatever kind of a thing. And so it's like everybody knew each other really, really well. And we all sort of had literally like our established, like, that this is
zones.
The zone that A16 goes to, so I'm not going to. And I knew not to, you know, go and like bogart Bob's zones before he got there in the morning because, so I mean, you talking about how many guiding companies there are, and then also the fact that there's also so many people just literally made me anxious.
It's pretty
got to
intense
be
now.
Like, just like a sort of roller derby, like who's going to get what climbs for
it can be, you know, it definitely can be. And that's part of why, like, for me, being a high energy person and morning person, I'll wake up at 5 a.m. to go pre-rig some climbs when my guests aren't showing up till 8.
Right.
But I'd rather, you know, take that extra time to give them just maybe that's 1 or 2 extra routes that they get into the day.
Right.
And it just makes the day flow a little better too.
Plus you look like such a chump when you wander around and get skunked.
Yeah.
Like it's the worst.
That's my biggest fear still is
it's like, I mean, they've hired you to be like the ace that knows more than everybody else. And like, yeah. Cause I mean, even back in the day, Lumpy Ridge and Estes, it always would happen. Like, you know, just you get up there and they're just throwing their pack down at the base of the thing that you wanted to do. And, so it's just funny because, and then you look like a chump and you're just like trying to figure out something else to do.
Yeah.
Trying not to show the fact that you're kind of up the creek.
Right. Yeah. You're trying to play it cool.
Yeah.
It's still my biggest fear. And, you know, the more you do it, the easier it gets because you start to learn the flow of the place and where everyone's going to be and you know,
for sure.
find those little hidden spots that are not in the guidebook and stuff.
Yeah, and that's all pretty key. But I can only imagine it's just like I said, like roller derby, like just like trying to, like I imagine like the running of the bulls or something. Like there's a gate that opens and everybody just starts like running towards their.
Luckily, it's not like Red Rock.
I'm doing sail away.
Or
whatever.
Never guided that route because there's always someone on it.
Totally.
That was my second ever rock climb though.
Oh, right on.
So I'm like, you know, these guys took me up the I-5-3 or whatever. It was my first climb. And it felt super straightforward. Like no technique really needed. It's just all big holds. And then day 2, they put me on sail away. And I'm like, what's a crack? Where are the holds? What are you supposed to do?
Right. Yeah. How'd you do?
I actually did okay. I mean, that was like a 1 fall and then got it on the second try.
Right.
I think crack climbing is really cool. Like I spent time in Indian Creek and, you know, most of my climbing's been on granite. So cracks have been pretty comfy for me. And I love the philosophy of crack climbing because it's like, it's like jazz music, in jazz, they tell you, listen to the notes they're not playing. In crack climbing, you're climbing the space between the rock. Like you're climbing the absence of the rock. I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And it's super secure. And it's like, maybe it's this masochistic side of like putting your hands or your fingers in something and it's kind of painful, but it's like such a good kind of pain. It's enjoyable.
Yeah. Well, it's tricky to guide. I think
because the hardest thing I have to do is teach people how to crack and slab.
Yeah, and I do a course every two times a year. I work for Steph Davis's
nice
crack clinic as sort of an auxiliary guide, and I'm very, very strong quotations in the air because I don't want to like make anyone think I'm a guide. I'm friends with Steph and I know Indian Creek really well.
Yeah,
and it's like the easiest guiding gig. Because it's all top roping there and like just slam up some ropes and have a good time. But teaching people to crack climb, especially there, although it's the rough rock and J tree's got to be pretty gnar on folks too. But it's such a counter. It's just a weird thing to teach someone who doesn't either climb a lot or never done it. Like where else? I always say this. Like where else in the world do you put your hand into a dark place and try to get it stuck?
Yeah,
like try. As hard as you can. Yeah. It's like, reaching up it's like Homer reaching up into the soda machine and then like he can't get his hand out. Like no one would not like, I'm just going to wander up and then, here's a dark hole in a rock. I'm going to shove my arm in there as far as I can get it.
Yeah.
Like honestly, like 99.999 of the population would just look at you and go, what the fuck are you talking about? You want me to do what?
It doesn't make sense at first, for sure. It's probably the least intuitive style of climbing, And
it's wild, the variance of the people who get it. First try, you're like, okay, here's how you do it. Here's what you do with your hand. And then boom. And then folks who are like amazing climbers otherwise, just like it's this mental block of it's pretty wild, the breadth of you take any given climber who on paper look like the same person up to that point. Yeah. And like some people just get it and other people it's like have to work really hard to sort of figure it out.
And I think I've been lucky that I just got it. Like I said, I don't climb too difficult of routes, but when I do climb, I think I do it well. And crack climbing has just kind of made sense. I mean, it's like, I don't know, maybe the people who taught me did a good job as well of just, it clicks in my head, I suppose, but so does, I think, a lot of climbing, like just the idea of the way you move your body and use your body's momentum at times. It's fascinating, but it also I'm not the best teacher because a lot of it's just, I'm doing it in the moment and not really realizing what I'm doing, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think the mentoring and guiding has to be strong. I think mostly on those teaching techniques. Like obviously the mentoring and guiding is very technical and here's how to do all these things and here's how to do them on an institutional level, which is very different than what I do and I think most people do on their own.
Yeah.
You're much more backed up, much more set in stone, to use the pun. But I think that's maybe in a mentorship where I think some of the stuff gets lost is that there are like great teaching techniques and even working with Steph, who's also not a guide in the pure sense. Seeing some of the things that she's come up with over the years to talk about how to crack climb is pretty interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if you've got that or if you're just like collecting things that work one day and don't work another day for teaching techniques.
It's a little bit of both. And maybe I shouldn't sell myself short as far as teaching because I was photographing and hanging out with Lynn Hill. One of the guide services in Joshua Tree, Cliffhanger Guides, does the Lynn Hill experience. And while they're not able to hire me for it because of permit situations, I'm friends with Lynn, so I just go and shoot. And hanging out with her, and they do like seminars and talks and not lectures, but like, classes on technique. And I'm listening to her teach technique, and I'm like, oh my God, I use the exact same teaching style and like even phrasing and wording that Lynn uses of like, slab climbing, heels down, butt out,
right.
You use your weight this way. I'm like, wow, maybe I do know a little bit more about this than I thought.
Right. And that's cool that they bring Lynn out there. I mean, that's her old stomping ground.
It is. Yeah. And it's so cool to hang out. Like I first met her at the Jim Bridwell Memorial a little over a year ago in the Valley, which I kind of got invited into, which, I mean, I had been to Yosemite once with my dad in 2011. We did a road trip, but I was not a climber. So my introduction to Yosemite as a climber is meeting Werner Braun, Lynn Hill, Dave Yarian, all these folks that, are legends.
Right.
And as a fan of the climbing history, that was mind-blowing to me.
Let me ask you another type of questioning. I get a lot of questions to me about like how to get the door opened in the community. Whether it's in a gym or just, like you were in Jersey, like isolated. You're in a place where there's kind of nowhere left that doesn't, I think, have, well, let me say that. There's a lot less places left that don't have at least some weird local gym-oriented climbing community. I mean, I'm sure, somewhere in the swamp and outside of Baton Rouge or whatever, but still it can like seem really clicky and insular. But you seem to have found some sort of formula to like just bypass that to where, like Hobo Greg is this, again, it's kind of this legend. Here I am talking to you, and I'm sure there's some slightly different version of it that exists online or whatever.
Yeah.
But you're in the 4 years, it sounds like you're a little Forrest Gumpy and that you like appeared in all these places.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about like what you think allows you to do that, and maybe if you were to give advice, because I can give some advice about it, but I've been in my own clique by choice and by design for so long that I've missed this whole gym thing or this whole like walking into what much more mayhem than it ever used to be.
I mean, I've climbed in a gym twice.
Okay.
So I have no experience
But
there.
what about this idea of like entering into this community?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, I've always had this personality that's outgoing to a degree. I mean, when I used to go to concerts, I wore a pizza costume.
Okay.
I was Pizza Man.
Okay.
Before I was Hobo Greg. And so I think
pre-internet or pre-social media?
For me, it was pre-social media.
Can we find some Pizza Man?
There might be some stuff.
Anyway,
I'm not sure about that. That's a good one. But yeah, just having that attitude of, I'm going to make myself look as ridiculous as possible so no one else has to be self-conscious. Like, let's all have a great time. Let's dance. Let's climb, whatever we're doing. And I think entering with that attitude made it really easy. It's, I don't know, like the climbers I've met in the quote dirtbag world have really just been great people. They've been very open and welcoming if you have that attitude. Like if you just match what they're bringing to the table, if you have that adventurous spirit and if you have that outgoing attitude and you're a positive person, I think it's going to work out for you. So yeah, like advice to people for how to find that. I think a lot of it comes down to having time, because if you only spend a weekend in a place, it's going to be a lot harder. The dirtbag world moves on a much slower rhythm,
right?
Which has its pluses and minuses. You know, sometimes the minus can be nobody's climbing until noon. And it's just too much hanging out. I think where I'm at now is kind of a nice balance, like having a job and dedicating myself to that craft of guiding. I don't really climb as much for myself during those 8 months that I'm working. But then I have the whole summer off to go travel and express my love of climbing, and finding that community wherever you go. I think you you pick up the pattern, go hang out at the parking lot when everyone's wrapping up at the end of the day and drink a couple beers with people and just kind of, if you can make friends in any other social circle, you'll have no problem in the climbing world, So maybe that's what it comes down to, is just having that personality that, if you're by yourself, like a lot of us are, just like one dude in a van. I do have my girlfriend with me on the road for the summer, but she doesn't climb, so that's kind of its own thing. But yeah, just being one guy or one girl in a van, just have the attitude of like, you're traveling, go meet people, go talk to people. If you have a smile on your face and you're nice, no one's going to tell you to get the hell out of here. It's funny you say that you found some of the climbing world to be cliquey. I don't know. It's been a different experience for me, I guess. Maybe it's cliquey and I don't notice it because I'm part of it.
No, I'm projecting.
Yeah.
No, I really am. Like, I really do reflect on that. And I'm like, I have my sort of attitudes and my own kind of baggage, I guess, that I bring about climbing. And that's generally speaking, up until I started doing the Enormocast, that's really the limiting thing, I think, again, reflecting. And what you just said about like dipping in for a weekend versus like having the time to kind of do that rhythm thing is, I think I'd never really thought of it that way. So it's sort of an insight that people need to think about, is that, you know, if you're dipping into the weekend, the weekenders have a plan.
Yeah.
You know, they've got their routes picked out, and they definitely aren't going to be as open to just some wingnut extra person coming with them. And it can feel like it's a bad attitude, but it's also an attitude you have to respect, because you get in that mode sometimes too. You know, if you're marching in to do a climb that you've talked about all week and you're geared up for it and everything else, the last thing you need is honestly
some random
Hobo
guy.
Greg, like,
some hobo,
like heading you off at the trailhead and wondering where you're going and if you want him to go climbing with you. And you have to respect that.
Absolutely.
You know? So you could walk away from that encounter where someone's like, yeah, we're going to do the whatever, the Enormodome or whatever. As like, oh, those guys were assholes. But no, you got to respect the fact that, they're on a program and you wouldn't suddenly want somebody in there either. So really, that's a good piece of advice of like, know the rhythm, know where it is you can kind of like reasonably expect someone to be like, yeah, sure, you know. And what you were saying about like the parking lot afterwards, like the kind of evening, like let's go fuck around type of climbing is where you're gonna get somebody's like, cool, we're gonna do this, like have a good, you know.
That's where you meet the people to go out and do something else.
He wants to go do this, and I don't even want to, but I'm going to belay him, so come with us, you know. Versus the like morning, we're all gearing up to get our objectives.
Yeah, you have an
done
objective.
for the day.
For sure.
So.
And I'm an objective-based climber. Like I remember when you had Mark Hudon, and I'm blanking on his partner's name.
Me too.
Yeah.
No.
Sorry, whoever Mark Hudon's partner was at the time. Max Jones. Because
you're talking about Max. You're not talking about
not Jordan. No,
okay.
that was a great episode.
No,
too.
I did remember Jordan. I was just dissing him.
Yeah. No, it was Mark and Max.
Yeah.
They spoke of how like they showed up in the valley and they had like a list of like these are the things we want to do. And I'm the same way. You know, I'm only inspired by what I'm inspired by, for better or for worse. I'm not the most well-rounded climber. Like awful with. Like when I see OW on the topo, that means other way.
Oh,
you know,
very good.
So I get what it's like to have an objective and then to navigate trying not to offend someone if they want to be, you know, they don't have a partner for the day or whatever it is.
Right.
But I think it's just like anything else. You need more time. You know, we live in a world where everything is so rushed, but climbing is a beautiful way to slow it down.
Right. And so going back to kind of your original decamping from the East Coast and that whole scene, you know, is there anything at all that you left behind that you have any sort of kind of, besides the pizza and the bagels?
No, that's it.
That's it.
Sorry, Mom. I don't come to see you more, but yeah, it's hard when there's, you know, if the Midwest didn't exist, like maybe if the Rockies and the Appalachians just touched each other, it'd be easier to get back there, but you got this whole blank spot in the middle.
Right.
And yeah, it's a attitude of a lot of the people as well. Like I grew up with people who would want to fight at the drop of a hat.
Right.
You know, and it's just a very aggressive part of the world, the Northeast. And that's not my style. Like I'm aggressive for a Californian now. Like I don't really fit in necessarily. But
they're like, settle down.
Yeah.
New Yorkie guy.
I'm stuck in between these two worlds. Right, you know, I'm way too chill for New York and not chill enough for the West Coast.
Right. That's awesome. So back to the, you know, I keep asking you sort of for advice, and it's maybe inappropriate in the fact that you don't have a ton of experience. I mean, 4.5 years climbing.
Yeah, it's not that much.
But at the same time, I think you have this perspective on it that's immediate, to where, you know, honestly, like a Max Jones telling you like how to get it done is, you know, with all due respect to Max, but the times have changed. You know?
Yeah.
So that other piece of advice that I'm asked for a ton, which I really have a hard time with, is that like I live in, you know, I can think of some folks in Houston, and we got to get out of here. Like, how do we do that? And to be honest with you, my escape from the Midwest was going to college, you know, and going to that like privilege thing, which I think dirtbagging gets harped on all the time now. Like fully, my dad was like, I'll pay for college. anywhere you can get in, anywhere you want to go.
Nice.
Now, obviously, he was hoping that I wouldn't go, to some like $100,000 a year private school or whatever, which he also, based on my report card, was pretty safe bet that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So he's like, I got a C student here. I should, it's going to be state
Wherever
school.
you want to go, kid.
I mean, but out of state versus in state's a big difference.
Yeah.
So, that was my ticket. And I understand that not, a very small percentage of the population has that specific ticket. Where I went to college and I didn't even work, at least the first couple of years. So that was my escape. It's a daunting challenge. What would aside from like the cliche, you just gotta grab life and go for it. Like,
Sometimes cliches exist for a reason, though.
Yeah.
Like, I'm happy that I got into this life and climbing before my dad died, because he wasn't rich. He was a blue collar phone worker, but there was some life insurance money. So I had some time after he died to just go full on into this dirtbag life. But before that, and then now I'm earning it my own way. And I think, climbers are pretty scrappy. You don't need a whole lot to live off of. You make 12 or 15 grand a year and you're living like a king or a queen. So I think, maybe that cliche is appropriate, that just go and figure it out as you're doing it. Because if you wait for the moment to be perfect, you're never going to leave.
Right.
It's never going to be perfect. You just have to kind of weigh your priorities in life. Like, if you like security and comfort and having an established group of friends all the time, maybe it's not the best option for you. But if you're a little more adventurous and you're a little less tied down, a little more loose, at least going for it and see what happens. I mean, you can always fall back on a job, especially if you have a college degree. It seems like that's a little easier to get a decent job and not just be digging ditches. But, I don't know. I've been, some of the happiest moments of my life have been doing manual labor jobs that I'm just saving up for some cool trip. Sometimes it's the reality. We're not all the sponsored athlete or the Instagram influencer. So just kind of piecing it together however you can. I think it's worth it going for it.
Well, I mean, you hit on something there too about the manual labor, because honestly, so many great climbers over the years, pre-sponsored climbership, it was
Roofing.
carpentry and roofing and banging nails, as we say, whether they're going in a roof or a wall or what. In the manual labor thing, and I do it, I still do it. It's a drag when there's no end to it, or when there's no goal. And the times that I've really not, I felt like trapped in house painting, which is what I've been doing for the last few years, is that like, and that's just part of life where you're just like banging it out for no particular reason. It was the most fun when I first started it, where I was doing what you did. Like, I'd work for a season, then I'd go do something. That doesn't exist anymore. But it's like, I don't know. There's also this thing you said about the comfort or about security, and I think that's really the daunting thing, is that what if it runs out? What if I'm somewhere and I have nothing? But I've never met a person who made the choice and even got to that point that didn't find a way out of it.
Yeah.
And looking back on it, it seemed way worse than it was at the time. And B, they almost look back on it as like, that was the moment where like my attitude shifted and I became like a different person. And, Andrew and I have talked about dirtbagging on the show in depth.
Yeah.
And
he seems to think you have to be miserable as part of their dirtbag experience.
Well, his point being is that like, you literally, again, we're traveling in cliches, but you literally begin to appreciate, okay, this is what I have. And also appreciate this is what the community does for me.
Yeah.
Because that's, I think, a big part of it, is that you're not going to starve to death and end up in a ditch in Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
You're just not. It's going to get taken care of.
Yeah. We're lucky to live in, a pretty wasteful country, so we can live off of that waste. All the dumpster diving and, leftover foods and stuff. Yeah. Like you said, you're never going to starve, most likely. You might be malnourished from too much ramen or something like that.
Right.
I think having the community is a big deal, because if you were just trying to do this by yourself, like if you just lived in isolation somewhere in a van, that would probably be pretty tough. But having other people to, maybe someone knows where you can find some work.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's
I work
really
on this
like,
pot farm. Come along.
Totally. And that's the thing I was just thinking about in terms of the community. Like if you're a good person and you're obviously, the cool thing about like the climbing and the dirt bagging thing is you obviously have some level of this weird twisted work ethic.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Work
like,
as little as possible.
But your life is this kind of like you're willing to go out and suffer if you're a rock climber. You're willing to go out and put yourself in scary situations. I mean, you have this character, and I'll go to the mat to say that that's not 100% true, but a large percentage of climbers have this built-in character. It's what drew them to climbing.
Yeah.
And so I think anybody who's looking for someone to do any sort of job knows that they can pluck a climber and get some level of dedication. Now, will they leave in 2 months when they're, but I think a lot of times if you're honest about that, that's fine. You know? And I've known so many climbers that have restaurants and construction companies and, whatever it happens to be now, pot farms, in the past pot farms too, but now really pot farms.
Now you can talk about it.
Yeah. And that's what they do. They just like, they see, you need some money. I got 2 months of work for you. Can you show up tomorrow? And if you can show up tomorrow and work your ass off for those 2 months, which you can because there's this like trip.
Yeah. I think, like you said, having that goal at the end. Like I worked before and then during my dad's death, saving up for those trips. I worked at a petting zoo.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And it was cool. I mean, I got to take care of equine and bovines. I'm like, mostly
bovines rule.
I don't mind picking up horse shit, but picking up cow shit is like wet concrete.
Who doesn't love the bovines?
Yeah. But I was working 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think in 2 months I had 2 days off.
Right.
But having that trip lined up at the end makes it tolerable. Like, you're daydreaming about it while you're working and, you're getting through those days because that there's this glorious experience waiting for you on the other side, whatever the experience turns out to be.
Right. Well, and it's like, I don't want to dismiss, because I get stuff from folks who have families, and, we've got a kid. And
if you have a kid, it's hard. It's
and it's like you need some level of security.
Yeah.
But there's no set path. Like that's the one I haven't been able to like, oh yeah, here's how it's done.
Yeah.
It's still just like, you gotta kind of travel to a place, maybe keep your sort of your ties alive, and then find out what it's going to be like because you can get a feel for a Bend, Oregon, or a Joshua Tree by being there for a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, it's a tricky thing, and I just kind of, wanted to kind of ask you that question. Because people are looking for a set answer, and I almost knew that you didn't have one, so I sort of put you on the spot.
No, it's cool. I never thought of it from that perspective of that there isn't a set answer because I'm just doing what works for me, and everyone has a different experience where they're coming from, and so it's going to be a different path to get to where they want to go. I think the main thing is to recognize that, especially when you're young. I'm 32. It's like right in the middle of these awesome years from, let's say, like 20 to 50 that, no offense.
No. I
maybe
love
60.
No, I love the fact that you gave it that much. Actually, that's a huge chunk of time. I thought you were going to say like 20 to 30 or 20. No. Yeah, no, that's awesome.
We'll go 20 to 60. Where your body is capable of doing what your mind wants it to do. You have that freedom. Like I don't have any kids. I don't have any student loans.
Right.
It's easy for me. It might be harder for someone else, but yeah, it's all, I think it all comes down to priorities. Like, what do you want to get out of this life?
Right.
If you want a 9 to 5 and a house and a family, that's great. I have nothing against that. For me, that's just not where I want to go with this,
Well, it's interesting that the reason I laughed again, it was because you actually were so generous.
Yeah.
Well, and you said, how old are you?
I'm 32.
Okay. So you were late 20s when this whole
I started climbing at 28, which is pretty late for a lot of people.
Yeah. And that's just the thing. And when you said, talk about like you have this window, like you really, I mean, the window really is your 20s, I think. And later on it can be done. And I get emails and like I said, I talk to people all the time that like they get into it later in life. But if you want to be the road dog guy that's in Joshua Tree on a Wednesday evening, hanging out, wondering if you're even going to climb that day, get it done early.
Yeah.
You know, and then you can have all that other stuff later.
Yeah. And that's my philosophy anyways. That like, you know, I'm retired now. I've never gotten the idea of, you know, go to college, get a job, work that job until you're 65 and then retire when it's too late to do a lot of things. Not everything, but it's too late to do a lot of these physical sort of things. It's just never made sense to me, you know, and I've been lucky in a lot of different ways to wind up where I am. Some of it's dedication and motivation to get there, but some of it's also luck as well.
Yeah. Well, when you're 50 and you're looking at those Social Security things they send you and there's like nothing in there because you never paid it.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, but there's you know, there's give and take. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, you're probably never going to have everything in life. And so I think I'm old enough to recognize I'm not, you know, youthful naivete about my life. And I see where it's going and I'm happy. Like I feel incredibly happy and incredibly fulfilled doing this thing. I mean, whether it's, you know, drinking beers in the space station with your friends or climbing some weird, obscure alpine-y sort of thing, whatever it is, it just makes me feel like I'm, you know, accomplishing something in my life. Like I grew up in New York City and here I am living mostly in California, climbing mountains. Like it just doesn't make sense to me sometimes. Like I should be some spiky hair Guido. Based on what everyone else I grew up
right,
is doing.
The trajectory was there. The path was clear.
Yeah.
A lot of hair gel involved. So imagine the money you're saving on that. On hair products. Well, cool, man. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I'm glad we got this done.
Thanks for having me on. I'm not really here to plug anything, but if folks want to go to hobogreg.com, especially if you're getting married, and especially if you're a climber who's getting married, that's kind of the niche I'm trying to carve out for myself, is doing more climbing weddings and more alternative weddings and stuff.
With the photography.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool to get more into that a little bit.
Do you produce writing on there or anything?
There's some writing. In fact, we have a mutual friend, Luke Mahal.
Oh, right.
And I'm featured in some of I'm trying to remember what volume of the climbing zine, but there's a couple articles in there.
Right.
And of course, featured in National Geographic. If you go to the October 2016 issue, you'll see a portrait of, they didn't put Hobo Greg. I was kind of bummed. They put my full legal name on it. But yeah, like when you said the legend of Hobo Greg, I was kind of laughing because it's kind of gotten out of control at times. Like my first time climbing in the Northeast, White Horse Ledge in New Hampshire, show up, racking up in the parking lot. There's like two cars there. Another car pulls in. This guy gets out. Hey, is that Hobo Greg? Like, whoa. Like, it's all the way from Joshua Tree he had met me. So it just kind of happens that way.
Right.
And yeah, it's been really cool to be here. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of what you're doing for climbing, giving people this sort of insider's view into things. And, you know, you're asking questions that a climber would ask. It's not like watching Honnold on 60 Minutes of like, don't you get scared?
Let me touch your hands.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was funny. But yeah, I think it's cool what you're doing. So thanks for having me on, sort of the mid-level character, you know?
Yeah, right on. Thanks for coming. And I have touched Alex Honnold's hands. All right, folks. Hobo Greg storming into Carbondale, demanding to be heard. It turned out to be a lot of fun. And once again, the lesson learned that, you know, I should just give folks a chance. Don't have preconceived notions about what a dirtbag is, about how people get after it, all those sorts of things. So thanks, Hobo Greg, for opening my eyes once again after all these years. And listen, if you've done a similar thing, a campaign to come on the show or send me emails, anything like that, you know what? Speaking of Joseph Campbell, emails, the Enormocast emails are the belly of the whale, are my lowest point on the hero journey. I get so behind, they just disappear into the list. You all know this. You've all got those little numbers attached to your email file that says like 500 or something unanswered emails. I'm the same way. So listen, if you send me an email about anything, actually, and you did not get any sort of reply, and I mean, I leave money on the table. I'll be honest with you. Just if it's important to you, email me back again. It has nothing to do with how I felt about your email. It has nothing to do with anything, but it just overwhelms me. All right? So yeah, re-email. Email me again. Demand to be heard. I will get back to you eventually, someday. Or just come to Carbondale, bang on my door. If you don't know where I live, just ask around. Seriously, I've been here 19 years. You're going to run into somebody that knows me. All right, have a good time out there. It's fall here in the US of A, and it's absolutely gorgeous out unless you live in Montana where it dumps like 3 feet or whatever. But I'm sure the ice climbers are probably already at it. So be careful out there, and of course, remember to check your knots.
Unlike the classical heroes, we're not going on our journey to save the world, but to save ourselves.
And in doing that, you save the world. I mean, you do. The influence of a vital person vitalizes. There's no doubt about it. The world is a wasteland. People have the notion of saving the world by shifting it around and changing the rules and so forth. And no, any world is a living world if it's alive. And the thing is to bring it to life. And the way to bring it to life is to find in your own case where your life is and be alive yourself, it seems to me.
The teachers told me that's where it's at, so I